The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy.
As I was thinking about the topic for this talk tonight, I was reflecting on my dad. And if my dad had really been into baseball, I probably would have gotten into baseball. But he was really into literature, so I got into literature. And I remember once watching a Shakespeare play. I'm on PBS or something, and he was reciting one of the speeches as was happening and thinking, wow. And one of the Shakespeare stories I never really understood until I think just later in life was the whole story of Othello, where this very nasty guy, Iago, decides to take revenge on Cassio by planting in Othello's ear the possibility that his wife Desdemona was having an affair with Cassio. And then the play is about watching this great leader just fall apart. And there's actually something called the Othello syndrome, which is a morbid jealousy preoccupied by thoughts of someone being unfaithful. And to some degree, we all suffer from jealousy and from envy. So I'd like to talk about how the experience of jealousy is part of the human journey. It's something we all experience at different times. And if you look closely, you'll see the confusion around jealousy. There's a story that we're holding in our mind that tends to circulate and calcify over time. And the good news is that you can see clearly into it and you can let go. And looking at jealousy and looking at envy is actually a very powerful way to see into the nature of conditioning, the product of your own conditioning, but also to get a glimpse of who you are unconditioned, the possibility of real freedom. So jealousy and envy, again, they just happen. One of the great stories is of this basketball player who got cut from his high school basketball team and was devastated, just sitting on the sidelines and overcome with jealousy and envy for these guys who are more talented than he was. Somehow, he was able to transform his jealousy into taking action. And there are lots of stories of people who've overcome their jealousy. But what's really cool is that guy who got cut from his high school team was Michael Jordan. He actually didn't make it on his high school team and went on to become arguably one of the best basketball players. So knowing Michael Jordan's out there, there's hope for all of us in overcoming our petty jealousies. And it's interesting when you really reflect on jealousy, on this quality of comparing mind, you may notice how your mind is built to compare. It's kind of designed to compare one thing to another, to compare yourself to other people. And then the result is quite often that we get caught in some form of judgment. There's a very interesting difference between jealousy and envy. Envy is the emotion of coveting what someone else has. And jealousy is the emotion related to the fear that something you have will be taken away by someone else. Someone said that envy is counting someone else's blessings. And jealousy is the fear you don't have enough. And so, of course, it shows up anywhere where you can compare. It shows up in regard to money, in terms of power, in terms of sex, appearance, character traits, influence. And it shows up in our behavior in different ways. It can show up as sadness. It can show up as depression. It can show up as anger. But quite often it shows up as demonizing the other. The person you're jealous of can become a fixation point. You kind of go back to it again and again. It's very hard to kind of eliminate jealousy. It's a real sticking point in the mind. A friend of mine who struggled with jealousy from a very early age, he said it's like fighting with a ghost. You're just caught in a really kind of a wretched place. And the interesting thing is you'll never be satisfied. You'll never satisfy your jealousy externally. We tend to lock into competition with other people, and it'll never be enough. So I should interrupt this Dharma talk to tell a really bad joke. I don't know who to attribute this to. My dad was so competitive with me that on his deathbed, as he breathed his last breath, he said, "Staring contest, go." Normally, when we experience jealousy, we're just caught in the reactivity. But like anything, like in mindfulness, our practice is to turn toward what's presenting. It's to have tea with the demon when it's there. And then you can learn more. You can get more familiar with kind of the underbelly of jealousy when it occurs for you. And familiarity is what leads to wisdom, to seeing more clearly. I had two friends in college, and one took a job right out of college that paid pretty well, gave him some stability, and the other friend just kind of wandered the earth for a while. Was kind of lost, found himself, lost himself again, and then he found something he really loved, where he had creativity, he was having fun, he was learning, and he started making a lot of money at the same time. My other friend was just stuck in jealousy. He said, I was the responsible one. He just goofed around. He's making more money I am. He's having more fun than me. And we're just caught in this bitterness of comparison. And it's a really interesting thing just to really reflect on the nature of comparison. So I thought maybe we'd just do a short little reflection, a little chance to kind of go through the files, your comparing mind files. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And when you just feel the breath, you might just notice this natural baked-in quality of the mind to compare. How do you compare yourself to your siblings or family members? How do you compare yourself to your neighbors? And to your friends? How much do you find your mind contemplating what other people have that you don't have and wanting what they have? As you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. There's something in this life force that creates ourselves as being someone special. And because we're special, we are making our way through the world and inevitably taking what we think we need. And of course, the world is full of people who think they're special and are taking what they need. And that's part of kind of the evolution of our species, is learning how to get ahead. At the same time, when we talk about the evolution of consciousness, the practice is seeing self in other and other in self, seeing our interconnectedness. And that only happens when we begin to really shift our consciousness. Our jealousy, the root of our jealousy, is really based on this concept of being separate, being a separate self. I talked a little bit about kind of the formation of this. I think it's best described as the kleshas through yoga philosophy. First, the belief that you're separate, and then the gathering of evidence that proves that you're separate, and then the list of what you like and what you don't like, and then defending what you like and you don't like. And then ultimately, the fear of death, which is losing this constructed world you've created that is going to just disappear. So when you're identified with a separate self, you have a story of who you are, and anything that threatens that story is going to reinforce a clench, a defending of that sense of self. So when you perceive someone who has more than you and you want it, that sense of self becomes, again, activated. And it's really based on something referred to in Pali as tanha. And the word tanha, it's translated as thirst. And the thirst is that desire for more. And there's some quality of the mind where the mind just wants more and more in ever-increasing quantities forever and ever. And when that function is running the system, that's when we're subject to the jealousy attacks, the envy attacks. Your entire focus is on self-preservation. If someone has something that you want and you don't have it, that's an attack on your sense of self. It's an attack on your story of being someone special. And that attack will show up as fear, as anxiety, as anger, as unsteadiness, as unrest, as depression. Jealousy is actually a defensive mechanism. You're preserving a sense of that self, that story. So then seeing that is really helpful. Just seeing how deeply unpleasant it is to be caught in jealousy and envy. It's kind of a bardo state. The bardo is kind of a hell realm. There's just no way out. You're just caught in this deep, deep sense of dissatisfaction. So the question is, what's the solution? What's so important, again, through this lens of mindfulness, is really getting that the answer is not outside. When you're working with jealousy and comparing mind, it's absolutely an inside job. It's about looking from the outside inside. It's not so much about getting the new job or making more money or getting plastic surgery so you look better or getting a new car so you present a little bit better. It's really about looking under the hood and looking at the internal world. And it takes some willingness to look at it. And this is why quite often, as the Buddha allegedly described this practice as swimming upstream. You're swimming against your own conditioning and swimming against the conditioning of the culture. So a friend was in a new relationship, brand new relationship, really, really taking off, really happy. And in her boyfriend's house, he had photos of his family. He'd been married before. And so there were families of the kids, and there was photos of the kids and photos of his ex-wife with the kids. And he had a really easy relationship with his ex-wife. He really worked on making sure the kids were taken care of and being a good role model, through their divorce and so forth. And so he would often leave to attend events with his ex. Every time she walked by these photographs of her with the family and her smiling boyfriend, she would just be overcome with jealousy. She couldn't shake it. And she found herself kind of like talking negatively about his ex, picking on little things, complaining about little behaviors of hers. And her boyfriend started getting defensive. He started pushing back. And inevitably, just sort of defending, sensing there's something going on, her aggression was getting a little bit out of control. And fortunately, she was aware enough to realize that this practice, her meditation practice, was helping her to see the discomfort of it. In the classic story, which I've shared many, many times, a yogini's meditating in her cave. She's visited by 3 demons, and they're whirling around the cave, and she very quietly gets up and starts building a little fire, and this really ticks the demons off because they're not reacting, and they crank it up a little bit more, and she gets a little teapot, puts it over the fire, and the demons are outraged. They throw everything they've got at her, and she's putting out these little teacups. Finally, the demons stop, and they say, "What is going on? We're your 3 worst nightmares, your 3 deepest wounds, and you're just building a fire and putting this tea kettle on. What gives?" She says, "Well, you've been here before, and you'll be here again. So in the meantime, what kind of tea would you like?" That's what this practice is all about. Can you actually stop and have tea with the demons when they're there? And so she knew that it was time to stop. And she recognized that she was scared. She was scared that she wasn't going to be attractive enough or smart enough, that she was going to lose this relationship that she really cared about, and that she was going to be alone for the rest of her life. When she could admit that and just name that to her partner, everything started to flow again. She felt a greater sense of ease. She could feel her radiance start to flow, her natural self and their natural attraction sort of began to sort of take off again. And this is one of the keys when you have the firepower to explore when you're caught in jealousy or comparing mind, is to really stop and examine that a little bit. So perhaps we can do just a short reflection here. So you might just take a moment to feel your breath. And we're just going to go through a little reflection. You might think of something in your life where you may feel some jealousy or some comparison. Or if you know of someone who's struggling with this, you might just sort of contemplate this, of what their experience may be. And you might take a few moments just to sense. Think of an issue or a relationship. And if you have something in mind, you might just sense if you can visualize it. Can you create some representation visually, a still image or a moving image? If there are any sounds or words or tone of voice you associate with this, what would they be? And you might take some time now to turn your attention to what this feels like on the inside. What does jealousy or envy or comparing mind feel like? And can you get a sense of how your nervous system holds this issue? And you might inquire, are there any emotional words that describe this feeling inside? Is there a sense of what you're feeling, or perhaps even what you're believing? And you might sense what it's like just to let this know you see it. If you could hold this with some kind of loving presence, some kind of empathy or compassion. Not to fix it, but just to be with it. And just noticing the sounds around you, noticing anything that may have shifted. And when you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. There's something so powerful about the practice of mindfulness. And just as in meditation, it's simply the intention to see things as they are. Kind of transcendent of your story or your embellishments or your preferences, just how they are. And that power of naming can be so powerful. As soon as you can name, oh, this is jealousy. Oh, this is envy. Oh, this is comparing mind. Sometimes just in the naming, you can find a sort of a sense of stepping back, a little more space between you and it, and just the naming can create a little bit more of a sense of freedom. But also it was so critical that when you take the time to investigate jealousy, is to really acknowledge where the hurt is, where that stuck place is inside, to acknowledge the fear that may be there, and to look really closely at what you're believing. Because quite often the root of anxiety is, I don't have enough, or I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm going to be alone, whatever that may be. To really examine those beliefs. And when you can name those beliefs, you can also ask who you are without that belief, which can provide a really interesting glimpse. For many years, I lived in a monastic setting where for well over a decade, I was making $28 a month before we got a raise to $35 a month. And when I left the community, I had a lot of anxiety around having enough, and I found myself in comparing mind a lot. I kind of given up what I thought were my prime earning years, to dedicate toward my practice, and I realized after a while that the truth was, I had more than some and less than others when it came to money. It was probably going to be that way forever. But I realized for myself, the more fear I lived in around money, the more I was going to be constricted and caught in that fear. And this points toward where the real freedom lies. The antidote to comparing mind is non-comparing mind, to letting it be. The antidote to not having enough is to choose what you already have. So much of our life, we live from a sense of lack, a sense of self-doubt, a sense of comparison, and then we fluctuate from inflation to deflation. And it's a very interesting thing. What makes for an attractive person? And it kind of points toward, what is the life you want to live? An attractive person, I find, is someone who is radiant. There's a presence and a radiance that they have. Kind of a creativity, a non-defended quality of mind. And it's the opposite of that comparing mind. And so part of the antidote to jealousy is loving kindness. I've never really jealousy has not been a real struggle in my life, but as I've been reflecting on this, there's kind of been someone through the stream of my life that I have compared myself to. Someone who was kind of financially independent, was very bright, and he had kind of a sense of a self-assuredness that I always wished that I had had. He was an author, and he was sort of financially independent enough to pursue that. And I found myself at times demonizing a little bit, like, well, I'd write a book too if I didn't have to work for a living and that sort of thing. And I didn't realize how much I was living from a sense of lack. And one day I read one of his books, and it was a really well-written book. It's a really good book. And I realized that I didn't want to be that person who was living small and who was complaining and who was sort of demonizing someone. And so I wrote him a letter. I said, this book is amazing. I can see how you put yourself into it. I see how you've developed yourself as a writer over these years, how important it's been, and how much dedication you've given to your writing. I'm just really, really blown away. And there was a really powerful shift that I felt of just consciously moving from a very tight, defended little knot of a person to a generous person who chose to see the good. We are all a product of conditioning. All of my conditioning was around feeling sorry for myself that I didn't have what he had. And what this practice reveals is how you are conditioned. When you practice non-judging awareness, you see how you are formed by all the events of your life. And you can begin to see how things are interconnected. This event happened, this is how I recoiled, this is how I self-protected, this is how it affected the choices I made in my life. All of that becomes more and more evident. So the good news, bad news is you begin to see everything that makes you small, but it also demonstrates that there's a choice. Just as you can see how you may be conditioned by believing that you're not good enough, you can also explore who you are without that thought and get those glimpses of who you are unconditioned. And that's where the practice gets really exciting. That's when you, after you've had tea with your demons, it can feel pretty good. So part of the question when it comes to working with jealousy and envy and comparing mind is to ask yourself, what kind of person do you want to be in life? And it's a kind of a radical shift. A friend of mine was saying that when he would see his wife kind of flirting with someone, how he kind of trained himself to say, I wish him well. May he find the right partner. He's a really good-looking guy. And what a shift that created for him. Just that generous shift from lack to more abundance. And if there's someone who has more money, to wish them ease, to find some way of being glad for them at the ease that they have in their life. That's taking the high road when it comes to practice. And really, I think what it comes down to is, what do you really, really want in this life? And I'm guessing it has something to do with happiness. To be really, truly, deeply happy. And happiness has two qualities. There's the happiness that is dependent on externals, and then there's the happiness that is not dependent on externals. And that kind of happiness that's not dependent on outer conditions. The jealousy and envy they're signposts. They're kind of these little flags that go off. They're reminders that you can let go. That you can return to what you really want in your life. To be truly and deeply happy. So that's about all I got on jealousy and envy. Why don't we close with a little meditation? As you sense the quality of here and now. You might just notice a certain quality of mind, this quality of the linear rational mind. It does three things really, really well. It's designed to compare and to judge and to figure things out. And you might sense in your own way how this functioning of mind has served you. Chances are your profession is a direct result of that function of mind. And you might sense in your own way of a quality of mind or quality of consciousness that doesn't compare and doesn't judge and doesn't try to figure anything out. A quality of presence, of awake awareness. And we'll close with a few minutes of practice. In your own way, just sense what it's like to open your attention to all the senses. sounds, taste, smell, perception of light. And sense what it's like to be awake in the senses. A non-grasping, non-judging quality of presence. And in these final minutes, you might take this time to wish yourself well, to imagine a radiance of heart and mind that is free from comparing, from jealousy. Where you can wish yourself well. And allow that well-wishing to radiate in all directions. May all feel free and happy and at peace. If there is someone in your life that may be struggling right now, you might just take a minute or two to wish them well.